everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be looking at the first two issues of the one-man anthology Airbag from artist Brian Canini. Thank you so much, Brian, for reaching out and sending these over. I'm always excited when I get free comics, and these are particularly good ones, so I'm really happy to share them with everyone. And yeah, I always appreciate it when an artist sends over their work because I know they put a lot of time and money into making this. So in the first issue here, we get a series of stories that are dealing with the theme of like loss in different ways. It seems like the first one is interesting because it starts on the cover and then comes in here as a prologue with this sailor getting stuck in the ice, and then it carries over into the back cover with the guy trying to escape and dying. So that kind of sets like the thematic tone on the bookends. Then you get this first story here. I'm just going to show like one piece from each story and read. I think the thing that I really liked about this issue is the dialogue. Brian's a cartoonist who's very much a writer, who's using the art to do the writing. I think that's the priority, is the characterization and the writing, which is kind of my favorite type of comic right now. So really enjoyed this. But this is just a son and a father. This is the older father here getting together and having lunch for the first time since COVID lockdown. And they get into a conversation basically about it's an argument about like the relationship between this character's wife and then his parents, and that's keeping the parents from interacting with the kids. That's a really interesting, just little real world problem that's popping up. And then just some of the dialogue that I really like, where the characters are talking. It says, the only thing we've done is stop popping by your house because we didn't feel welcome there. If the only way you can have a relationship with your grandkids is if we do all the legwork, then there's a problem. And the dad says, I'm hurt that you'd even think that. And they get in an argument about like who's done what and why. And so just that really, small slice of life character focus with good dialogue seems to be the core aesthetic of ethic of what Brian Canini's going for in this. Here's another one that follows this character through a few years of his life. This is the opening section where his girlfriend breaks up with him. And she's saying, look, I'm sorry about your mom, Mark. I really am, but I can't do this anymore. I can't keep sitting around waiting for someone else's life to end so that maybe mine can begin. That's not fair to anyone, which is a pretty brutal reason to leave someone and a pretty brutal thing to say to someone, having gone through a number of similar type of events now with Tori. I can't imagine, better for Mark here in the end that someone who wouldn't stick with him through something like that is no longer in his life. Because, yeah, like if you can't stick with someone through a tough couple years in their life, they're, especially if you're the type of person who would repay that to them, then they're not worth being with. But yeah, I really like that bit of dialogue because it's so cutting and so brutal. So we follow this character Mark then into the future where he's still lamenting the loss of this relationship, and he's ready to jump, and this character comes up and says, you look like a guy who's spending too much of his time looking backwards. Well, let me tell you, if you're always looking back to the future, the future will go by unnoticed. So, no big, huge revelations there, but just comics that kind of land this little wise moral at the end of it, I think are really, really nice. And then it undercuts the seriousness of it with the joke there. And then this story here is a bit confusing to me. I feel like it's going to be part of a longer narrative maybe, but it doesn't show up in issue 2, so I'm not sure. But it starts on September 11th, 2001, looking for someone looking for the character Tony. So there's some relationship to 9/11 there. And throughout the story, the Tony character talks about wanting to, do something good for society. So it's implied that he's like maybe a police officer or a firefighter who got lost in 9/11, but I'm not sure. That doesn't resolve super clear. So that's where I feel like it might be an ongoing thing. But you have him basically just not really fitting into the party. This actually is a character, Rob, who's there, and the Tony character comes in and defends the situation later. This is Tony, the guy that's gone missing. But this character, Rob, is at a typical like high school or college party. Everyone drinking beer. He's uncomfortable. The Tony character stops the fight at some point. But again, just some good dialogue here. This one's funnier, where two people now have given him a beer, and or no, one person's given him a beer and another one's going to give him another beer because she thinks he's drinking something bad. They're both disgusting, but this character is saying, I swear Alex wouldn't know a good beer if it sucked his dick here. So just kind of those like funny, casual one-off, like make you laugh, something someone would say. That's really, I think the biggest strength of the comic. And then the cartooning's great all throughout. It's like story-oriented cartooning that's, usually pretty pulled back and focused on character, but can open up and like paint a picture of a world throughout and have a lot of detail in it. So I think, Brian's really good at picking his moments, when to pull back and when to show a lot. Issue 2 is probably even more well crafted in terms of how the pieces of the story unfold and interrelate and how the cartooning goes. But I'll say right out the gate, just as the content of it is not my thing. It's very well executed, but it's comics about comic creators struggling. So that's just, I don't know. I'm not so interested in hearing about that anymore from cartoonists, but it's a very well done issue. You get the kind of cover here, which is just cool. Someone thinking obsessively about comics, basically, that sets the tone for the issue. Then you get a bit about the author, like how he was obsessed with the Ninja Turtles, and that led to a life in comics, which is 100%. I get it. That's why I'm here too. And then you get an introduction to this character, Quentin Skaggs. Quentin Skaggs is someone who's invented the idea of a comic book in this world, a booklet filled with original comic stories from a single creator, and everyone kind of laughs at him like no one's going to pay for that. Also, on the back cover, you get him trying to sell this to a publisher, and they're like, I don't know, man, like these are for comics or for newspapers. No one's going to read this. Like, the written word's eternal. And then Brian Canini's taking a shot at the fall of the newspaper. That's totally irrelevant now. And even back then, we're just wrapping fish, and comics are like these things that are still being made and being collected and all of that. So that's kind of the Quentin Skaggs character. Then you go into, I think, my favorite part of the story, which is a relationship between here a daughter and a father. So kind of different than the father and a son in the first one. The father has died and the daughter's cleaning up, and she finds a Christmas tree and has some memories and also finds some art. Here, I really like the formalism of this is Quentin Skaggs actually winds up being her father, but it's kind of not told right out the gate in this story. So she's just remembering him cutting this Christmas tree up, trying to get it to fit and not lean in the house. And as he cuts off more and more and the tree gets smaller, the panels get more and more condensed. I really like that formalism, showing the frustration of how much smaller it's getting. But yeah, this girl finds a box full of memorabilia, including a whole bunch of art that's signed QS. And she starts to realize that her father used to be a really important cartoonist. Basically, he is the guy that invented cartoons, or comics, the comic anthology, as you see on the bookends here. And then she's remembering and having to struggle with the idea that he basically discouraged her from being an artist. That it was like, this isn't a way to make money, do something reasonable, like I'm a plumber. And he's like, why don't you be an architect? You need a real career. And so she's, after her father's death, grappling with this revelation that he was a well-known artist all along. And that's why he was trying to keep her from what he feels was a mistake of time wasted on comics in his early career. Here you see now in the aftermarket, this character Skaggs is really, really revered. So that's what I like about the structure of this is a different story. It's about this character more and getting picked on and stuff, but it does mention Skaggs, that this character is like not into the Youngblood type of comics, but is looking back at the old masters and really happy to find a Skaggs issue. So you're seeing the story from a bunch of different angles, which structurally I really like. I just don't, like the comics about comic artists, especially like fictional ones, kind of just lamenting the state of comics. I don't know. And then you go into another one that's focused on this character, Charlie Wood. I'm assuming this is a stand-in for Brian Canini. We have a shout out to Noah Van Skeever here. We get basically how much cons suck, which is something that after going to like Mocha myself and kind of just talking to more and more people about how anyone barely ever breaks even at conventions and just how awkward they can be and stuff. That weird like, oh yeah, cool, I'll be back, which I've seen from both. I've done that to people, and I've been on the other side of like, oh, I'm just looking, I'll swing on back. The whole thing's weird, and I don't think it's the best we can do for the independent small press comics community. I don't know what can be done. I know we want to support retailers, but retailers aren't putting, there's not many retailers in the country that are stocking this book and things like that. So this really just makes me think more about what's missing. There's a component missing in our industry and medium for people like Brian Canini. And there seems like there's got to be some kind of online social media environment that can function as a convention for no pay or something. I don't know. So it brings up a good issue. It has, again, some fun formalisms as the character gets some magic ink and like falls into his story, and you get all of his memories coming with him. Some interesting things like that. And then you get this where a character is visiting the Billy Ireland, and they're going in and they're talking about how they've just come into this big donation of Quentin Skaggs' work found by the family. So that's going back to the story. And this character, again, is kind of lamenting the time spent on comics. It's, like I said, structurally, I think it's really, really interesting how it's telling one story while it's also telling a bunch of smaller stories. That's a format I'm really, really enjoying right now. These kind of kaleidoscope quilt patchwork, looking at something and looking at a character from multiple angles and like investigating different characters' interiors related to that character. So that's all well done. It's just the subject matter that's not for me. So I really look forward to AIRBAG 3, because AIRBAG 1 dealt with stuff that had nothing to do with comics. And then this is like, everyone's got to get one out of their system, I think. So I look forward to seeing what Brian Canini does with all of that talent and interest in form and structure and all of that going forward in AIRBAG. The other thing with this is it just reminds me of the Seth book. I'm going to blank on what it's called, but where the cartoonist gets obsessed about tracking down old cartoonist and finds that he hasn't done anything for years and got married and raised a stepdaughter and had a fulfilling life outside of comics. I really love that book. Sorry, I'm blanking on the title because it's a longer name. But the whole Quentin Skaggs story just feels a little bit derivative of that to me as well. Or if not like derivative, just a little too close to that. And that's a book that already kind of impacted me and made me question, what the real value in life is. I do like that here in AIRBAG number 2 as well, that Brian Canini seems to be ruminating over family versus craft, and I think is also trying to think about how to balance that. That's what I'm trying to do now too. Like, how can you have a career and support your family and be a family person and make that your priority, but still have time to put out stuff and do work? Trying to figure out, okay, well, I got to compress my stories so they're manageable or whatever. And I think Canini's dealing with that in this book in a compelling way. Obviously is kind of in that situation himself where these things are definitely not something that he's doing for a living, but it's a passion of his. And I love that aspect of comics, that so many of the comics I enjoy come from people who are living real lives and just doing this in the evenings and weekends, just like I am. And that passion you don't get anywhere else. And so I really appreciate that. But yeah, great writer, great cartoonist. I love these writing driven comics. And right after I got these, I did the interview with Alex Nall, and Alex recommended Brian Canini's work to me, and I was like, oh yeah, I just got that, I'll go read it now. So again, thank you to Brian for sending these over. I think this is great work, and I really look forward to seeing where you go from here, man. Appreciate it. The Eisner nominated The Strange Death of Alex Raymond by Dave Sim and myself. This is a gorgeously illustrated and designed book, Dave doing most of the illustration. Amazing compositions throughout. What Dave is doing is he's recording his obsession with the death of master cartoonist Alex Raymond behind the wheel of Stan Drake's car when they got into a car crash. The best description of the book that I've heard is that it's like understanding comics with pages like this, mixed with something like From Hell when you get into the theories about what actually happened with the car crash. And then with Sean on production, it's just one of the most gorgeously printed books you could get a hold of.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.